Hello and welcome to MySecurityTV and our special series with Bugcrowd. This special episode is a Hack the Hacker series, and we're joined by one of the Bugcrowd hackers, CJ Fairhead. Thank you, CJ, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great. And with the Bugcrowd senior leadership team, we'll call them, Michael Skelton is up in Brisbane and Sajeeb Lohani in Melbourne. Thanks very much for joining us, gents.
Thank you for having us.
Very happy to be here.
Now, this is to introduce the latest edition of Inside the Mind of a Hacker, or ITMOAH, or however we're calling that. I last covered this particular report with Casey himself in Singapore. So it's great to have this around about 12 months since the last edition. But most of us would have seen the previous edition. Some great takeaways there. I might hand over to Michael first, you've had a lot of input into this latest edition, and just sort of what are the key draw cards that we might be referring to. And then we'll come back to CJ in terms of how this resonates with him as well.
Yeah, I guess two main overarching themes that differ a little bit from last year. The rise of AI hacking, it's always been here, but both in interest and programs is increased from prior years. And hardware hacking continues to grow. And particularly on the Bugcrowd landscape, we've been doing more and more hardware engagements over the last year, and that's starting to reflect in reports like this as a growth point for the industry in general.
Yeah, and when you say hardware, the IoT device kind of hardware, or more?
Yeah, I mean, the last year we've done everything from ATMs to printers, routers. You know, it really depends on the format of the engagement, but there's a pretty wide spread under that umbrella, and it's reflecting throughout the report.
Well, I was actually looking at the public bug bounties on the system the other day, and on IoT particularly, and there's quite a nice spread there. Saj, I'd take it some of this isn't relatively new. Any standouts that might have been different from previous reports as well for you?
Yeah, there's actually quite a strong focus on AI, obviously, with AI becoming more of a centerpiece to everyone's current tech stack. It's also looking at how AI will contribute not only from the productivity increase, but also from the creativity increase. It also quite clearly points out that AI is not only just a productivity improvement, but it's also a security threat. So the report also looks into those different aspects and areas, which is quite interesting considering the current threat landscape in the world.
Well, this comes to you, CJ. How are you approaching it, both hardware and also AI? Maybe you've been with Bugcrowd a number of years. How do you tend to approach it? What's your skill set in this regard?
Well, I mean, AI is being the new hot topic. It's kind of a developing skill set. So it's something I've dabbled with. I've been even this morning actually was reading through the brief of a private program that has recently added into interactions with their help or chatbot, which I guess is powered by some form of AI on the back end. So I've been looking at that, but it's still, I guess, early days for me. So I'm dipping my toes, but it's an interesting sort of new frontier.
Well, that's something we've spoken to Saj in the past on a previous episode. Do you find that is your approach? It's a constant learning process for you. It's not so much maybe following the money, but definitely following where those trends are and what skill sets you might require, and adapting your existing knowledge to a new problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't think you should do this just for the money. Don't just follow the money. It's certainly it's an interesting new sort of step in technology in general, right? So, I mean, personally, I'm just really interested in learning new things and seeing how things work, and I think that's fairly common around the sort of hacker community. So, bug bounties and hacking aside, just learning how this stuff works is pretty interesting to me. The flow on from that is you kind of get a bit of a peek under the covers of how it looks and how it runs, and gives you a better idea of how to maybe approach it from a security, like an attack standpoint.
Nice. And Michael, maybe from the business side, the requirements from the client end, Bug Bounty, sort of Bugcrowd's clients, what's the take up? What's the sort of this year? It's a relatively new service coming through. There's two aspects. One is the client demand in terms of what their needs are, and also getting them to have an awareness of this capability. But as we're just talking to CJ, it's obviously the crowd and the community that you've got existing, and how they can adapt to their new client requirements as well. There's two sides of this going on in terms of their learning and awareness.
Yeah, which I think is a strength from the business side. So we built in partnership with ChatGPT the first AI program to enter the space, which was by far the best partner at the time to help us really understand, what were we going to do, how are we going to do it, and then extended that into our VRT. And then more recently, we've been approaching crowd members to help us enhance that. So the VRT, or vulnerability rating taxonomy, is our classification system to make sure we're classifying risks, but it also serves purpose to educate the crowd. Because for each VRT entry, there's a template of what that finding could look like to give you threads on, how do you learn about it. So the state we're at is, we've built in partnership with the customers that have entered this space and explored it. And now we're extending that work to work with the crowd, enhance what we're doing on classification, and make sure that, our processes are keeping up with what is a very quickly evolving space.
Any early indicators on the early demand trends? Like CJ mentioned the chatbot approach, and I've heard or read about some vulnerabilities being found within chatbots, and that they can be manipulated. And then I'd imagine there's some clients that are developing up, beyond LLMs and the like, and more on the machine learning side and testing new algorithms. Do they want that trialed? Any early trends here for what the demand is?
I mean, early stages, LLMs are still going to rule the land, I think, for at least the next year. That's the quickest to deploy and the most likely that a customer has within their scope for testing. So I think, LLM testing and the evolution of that as we move into more, reinforced standard practice for how to test that should then see us changing direction into other areas. But for now, it is still very much a heavy LLM focus. And I think that's AI in general. Still, a lot of the times when, mass media and others refer to AI, they are still talking about LLMs. We haven't really graduated past that in technology in general, and security, really needs that industry to move before the testing function can move with it.
At any particular platforms, I'll open it to all of you in terms of, are we mainly on AWS or Azure? Are they sort of the business applications, or is it sort of a broader type? Do we have any sort of platform preferences here, or again, even from the hackers' side, anything that they should be aware of that they should start to learn on? Saj, maybe to you.
So reality is, it's kind of the, whatever you really want. Whatever you're familiar with already helps. Like Amazon has Amazon Q, which you can go and utilize, which is actually kind of a very, cool tool to go and use. OpenAI has their own API. Hugging Face is a really good API too, if you're interested in playing around with it for free and things like that. So reality is kind of, there's a lot of fish in the sea. It's kind of pick out which one works really well for you. And don't be afraid to test out a bunch of them, because all of them actually do have their own perks, and a lot of these models have been built in completely different ways, even though they are a very similar strain of thing. They might all be LLMs, but they have very different approaches to their tokenization. Yeah. So find the one that works really well for you, find, the technology that works quite well. And the other part that I probably very, very clearly state is prompt engineering has become a very utilized term. There's a reason for it. It does change the way you utilize an LLM. You can get a very distinct and varying result from the way you prompt these systems. If you prompt it correctly, or with a certain amount of finesse, you can get better results. So learning that aspect can also be very, very helpful.
Well, the other thought might be the quality of the release notes that they have with these systems. CJ, are you looking at any particular platforms or applications in particular? Be that, you mentioned chatbots, but things like voice or vision and the like. Do you find you have a preference at all?
It's mostly chat at the moment, because there's just not as much utilization. I think, as Michael said, like, it's still quite early. So, when it comes to seeing this stuff in the wild, there's not a lot of real world applications of it yet, as far as like bounties and security go. So it's a lot more focused on the text side of things. Having said that, I have definitely dabbled with the images and some of the voice, more like as a concept, and just sort of seeing what you can do. You see a lot of pretty interesting stuff coming out of, like, imitating people's voices and pretending to be a CFO of company X and requesting money and things like that. So just sort of understanding how available and how easy to use some of those tools are is quite interesting. But yeah, from a bounty and security space, it's still very, very text focused for me at the moment.
I think that's the key takeaway out of this particular series, is we want to hear from you as the hacker community and how you try to break things, basically, or find out how they're breaking. It really is important for the CISOs and the CTOs to understand that before they release, and that's the key aspect here. Michael, it's a hard question to ask. Are you surprised at how? Are we finding a lot of vulnerabilities? Is it easy in terms of what's the play here? Is it like, okay, bug bounty goes up and it's broken straight away, or there's some is there a lot of low hanging fruit here for the crowd to be breaking, and which then sends the signal back to the clients to go, you need to be testing everything and a lot more on an ongoing basis. The chicken and the egg, so to speak.
Yeah, very much so. It's a bit of a mixed bag. For those that are particularly experienced at it, they seem to be having quite good success. We've run like some programs that specifically test models themselves, and we've seen some hackers do some wonderfully creative things. I'd say the most interesting part of it is it's a very creative type of hacking. It's much the thought process that goes into those submissions is quite unique and kind of dazzling in its own way. And so I think it's more less about volume, more the vulnerabilities when they are found tend to be fairly impactful, and you don't tend to have as many like lower severity issues that happen in that space. In terms of the breadth of vulnerabilities, web hacking's far more mapped out and far more understood. There's certainly still to this point going to be far more attack surface there, and I would encourage a hacker starting out to get a very strong grasp on that area well before they pursue something like AI hacking in other areas, because the thought process really matures in the web space. And then from an education standpoint, it's often finding hackers that are already experienced in other places, and they're at this point very actively tweeting resources and learning materials. Like people like Jason Haddix and Res Zero are people that I often pay attention to when they're posting something about AI, because they're in that journey where they're very talented individuals in a range of hacking and now talking about this new style, and has that correlation of thought. But you really follow that from having that foundation in another area and be able to go, okay, like, Jason's talked about this, Jason's someone I respect. I'm going to go and see how he got there from where he was at. So
is there a bit of a rejuvenation in the hacking community over the opportunities in this space? Saj, are you missing that? Are you thinking going back straight onto the tools?
I mean, we've definitely had quite a little bit of that come in, as in pretty much, especially considering when it comes to things like AI hacking, especially with LLMs, it is quite easy to get your hands on the tools and play with them.
Yeah.
Which makes it very attractive for someone to go and have a little bit of fun. So it is that type of thing. And it's also, for lack of better words, a very interesting puzzle. So definitely we do see quite a lot of people just, enjoying themselves trying to crack a bit of a puzzle. It's like a Rubik's Cube. It's trying to twist it around and figure out how it works for the fun of it. So yeah, definitely.
Well, the last one is the classification, Michael. You mentioned the VRTs and the like. From the hacker to the crowd, what would they be looking for? How are you classing the hacker community here, or rating them, so to speak? Is there any unique aspect in terms of the AI side different to the more traditional approach?
Well, it's still very manual selection in terms of like where a lot of our traditional sourcing methods are rather there's a lot of tooling that we've built. This is such a new area and so unique that it's very much paying attention to, who's doing unique things and surfacing them and tracking that cohort. We don't really rank and benchmark a cohort that way, but we are paying attention. Okay, this person's particularly creative. They've done this wonderful thing. Let's make sure we get similar opportunities in front of them.
Yeah.
And trying to really understand as that matures, like who are the people that really are making waves and finding new types of attack surface.
Well, that's something maybe to you, CJ. Do you find you do compare yourself to others, or you do really come in on an individual level and just focus on what you're capable of? And again, the other one we spoke to is about building a CV of projects that you have been able to contribute to as well. Yeah, what is your general approach and how you might benchmark yourself?
I think anyone who doesn't compare themselves to others in this space is lying, first of all, if they say they don't. It's a funny sort of industry to be a part of. Everybody, the imposter syndrome is very, very real. So yeah, absolutely. It's looking at what the next person is doing. You'll submit something and you'll feel great about it, and then you'll see a tweet and go, "Oh wow, that's so cool! I could never do that." It's a constant cycle. So yeah, there's a lot of comparison. Reminding yourself that if you find a duplicate bug, it's still a bug. You still found the thing. It can be hard sometimes. And as far as, I guess, building it up a CV of the things that you've worked on, I think it's just time and really you can tell who's really passionate about this stuff because they're still going. They're still going. They're still contributing. It's been really interesting. Like Michael really hit the nail on the head before with the comment around how the approach to these kinds of LLM bugs is very different. Like the thought process that goes into it's kind of entirely like a lot of the rules kind of go out the window. There is still a fundamental level there of looking at, okay, well, this company has introduced an LLM. What might they be using it for, or what information would that have to have access to behind the scenes to do the thing? So there's still that kind of core understanding of how they might be built, but your approach is so different. And I feel like I'm a bit of a beginner again as far as that goes. Like you're starting at the bottom.
Well, it does sound like it's coming back to the core skill set of what I would call a true hacker, where they love looking at things in a completely different way. And no doubt some of these sort of applications and LLMs are designed for a set purpose, and the developers just have a silo mentality as to what that is until someone comes along with a creative brain and goes, nope, I'm not going to use it like that. I'm going to do this to it. And suddenly it's thrown out of context and it might well break or have a vulnerability in it, which is really, really cool. Michael, should be aligned to this particular interview, aligned to the release of the report. Is there any other sort of takeaway or call to action within this, or is it a matter of just get your hands on it, grab a cup of coffee and sit down and read it? Or do you think there's some real learning here that the crowd and the community can take away with?
Well, I think the other one is that, hardware and the availability of hardware programs continues to rise. And it's something I don't think is necessarily as visible publicly because a lot of those engagements tend to be private. If someone's talented as a hardware hacker and approaches us, it's very likely we can get them programs in their hand. Because a lot of the time that requires shipping devices to people or bringing people to an event as well. And because of the nature of those engagements, they're very challenging to make public because you need to have mass availability of devices. So I think, if you're a hardware hacker, reading this report is particularly insightful. If you're not and you're interested in it, it's another avenue that I think is well worth pursuing. And equally, much like we talked about AI requiring that very deep, creative style of hacking, hardware as well is phenomenal in the ability of that crowd and the creativity that crowd brings, and then also rather unique attack surface. So.
And can I just clarify, hardware, is that controllers or PLCs or just general
The whole gamut, realistically
home
speaking.
devices and the like?
Yeah, I mean, really, realistically, it's pretty broad spectrum. We and a lot of people that have done, we've had company come to us with a printer and say, can you get root shell through a printer cartridge, and had a hacker accomplish that, for example, which is just a phenomenal outcome. We've had router manufacturers, bring us, 50 routers. Can you send them to 50 hackers? And they get to keep at the end of an engagement, but we want to know what's possible. We've had, laptops, ATMs. With ATMs, obviously, would have to be an on-site engagement, but this really wide array of very interesting engagements that present opportunity to people with that skill set or growing that skill set.
Nice. Well, I've heard of the home robot and the cleaning robot and the like have vulnerabilities in them. And here in Australia, just for context, we're hearing our electric vehicles are all recording audio and visual and sending that back to third parties. So even those kind of things, if they're vulnerable, create a lot of issues. So again, there's always vulnerabilities in all of our systems and all of this code. And it sounds like the code isn't perfect, even if it's been generated by AI in itself in its own right. But look, on that note, we'll cut it off because we'll let the audience wanting more to actually read this latest report of Inside the Mind of a Hacker. We've been joined by Michael Skelton there in Brisbane, Sajeeb Lohani, I beg your pardon, in Melbourne, and CJ Fairhead. I won't give you away where you are, but you're in Australia, CJ. We'll keep a sort of brief introduction to you in that regard as well. But thank you for joining us for the Hacker series, an Australian context with Bugcrowd, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.